Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson, and we are officially at the mid-season mark for the 2022 season.
Wow, halfway through, and I don't know if it feels like it or not, honestly, but maybe it does. I don't know. If I don't feel too strongly either way, it probably does, so yeah. That's fair. Here we go. We'll go over our picks, our difference in picks. Blake has 69 correct on the season. I have 74 correct on the season. So what's any ground gained on your end?
No update
from last week.
We are every time we pick differently. It always balances out. You get a few right. Wow. I get a few right. And
that's surprising.
Yeah, it is.
That's really surprising because I made some bold choices. I felt so.
Yeah,
interesting.
And your bold choices didn't really pay off. It was really more the obvious ones that you missed there. So,
fair enough.
That being said, let's talk about the teams that are on a bye, and we should we'll kind of mention a few of these in upcoming weeks because they're on a bye. But a few big trades were happening on Tuesday this week. So let's go ahead and run down the teams, and then we'll kind of talk about who went where. So we've got the 2-6 Steelers, the 3-5 Browns, the 3-5 Broncos, the 4-4 49ers. A lot of fours in that one. The 6-2 Giants, and the 6-2 Cowboys.
Wow. It's tough to see the Broncos with the losing record lumped in with some of those lower end teams. I'm kind of surprised the 49ers went 4-4, but yeah, they'll probably end off better. But yeah, are you wanting to talk about the trades now or save that for kind of later? When we talk about their respective teams.
I think for the ones that are on a bye, like the Steelers traded away Chase Claypool to the Bears. We'll talk about him later. Chase Edmonds went to the Broncos. He's got his bye week a little earlier than anticipated. And Bradley Chubb, obviously not a fantasy relevant unless you're doing IDP, but a big move for the Miami Dolphins defense there.
For sure.
Involved in that one. And then the 49ers traded away Jeff Wilson Jr. to, who would have guessed it, Miami.
Yeah, they instantly replaced him. So we'll talk more about the ramifications about that later, but I, for one, had Edmonds and Jeff Wilson on my roster, so that was interesting to see so many moves with them.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to Thursday Night Football, which is the Eagles at the Texans. 14-point favorite Eagles, where I'll go ahead and say away from home 14-point favorite, but I'll go ahead and take them in my prediction. So Week 8 was kind of a weird one for the Eagles. Jalen Hurts threw 4 passing touchdowns. That's already weird enough, but 3 of them went to A.J. Brown. So a lot of the points from last week were between those two players, honestly, alone. And the Eagles rested many of their starters in the fourth quarter. They were against the Steelers last week, right?
Yeah.
I believe that's true. Yeah, that's at least the second time that's happened against the Steelers. That team has rested some starters against them, I'm pretty sure. So not a good look for them, that defense, at all.
Yeah. They're definitely missing T.J. Watt.
Yes, for sure. And then with Devontae Smith is the only player I'll really focus on. He had 7.3 fantasy points, 5 receptions, 8 targets. I'll just ask you point blank, and I think you'll probably agree with me. Is he a buy low candidate?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not really sure if anyone's going to be panicking over one game to take him because, he's coming off, obviously, the bye week in Week 7, but before that, 15.5 points against Dallas and 18.7 at Arizona. I think whoever's rostering Devontae Smith in your league is likely going to probably view this one as more of a blip on the radar than something to panic over.
I agree. Maybe worth submitting a trade just for fun because I think that is the correct perspective. So if the manager that has him believes that, then they will probably keep him. But worth a shot maybe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll move on to the Texans. Dameon Pierce was a very inefficient runner in Week 8, 2.33 yards per carry, but he had a receiving touchdown and he's had 16 receptions in his last 4 games, so he's getting utilized heavily through the air, which is great for his PPR floor. He really exceeded our expectations. It seemed like all the hype going into the season with the rookie just because he was doing well in the preseason seemed like it was maybe reaching a little bit on what his value could be. He was really rising up on ADP, and we're like, it's the Texans offense. But he's proven a lot of us wrong, and he's getting that usage that he got more usage than he had in college. So that's usually not the norm for a rookie in the NFL. But he's legit, and I would venture to say that this offense is making him the focal point, and I think that's really hurting Brandon Cooks specifically. I'll talk about Davis Mills, who threw for 152 passing yards on 12 completions in Week 8, so not a whole lot of volume. 17 completions, yeah. Not a whole lot of volume for his pass catchers. And that's what I'm saying, is that Brandon Cook's ceiling is limited due to that. He's seen 4 receptions in 3 straight games. That's very low for him. And I think the team is pivoting to Pierce being the focal point of this offense, and I think it's hurting Brandon Cook's ceiling. And there's really no one else that probably is being rostered. Maybe Nico Collins, but he's been injured a lot. But do you think my assessment of this offense's focal points is correct?
Yeah, generally I would say so. I mean, I think obviously lower expectations for Dameon Pierce. He caught that touchdown with about 46 seconds left in the game, so his day was kind of salvaged by that garbage time score. But I agree with you. He is being featured in a workhorse type load. Nico Collins has been rolled out for this game already, so Brandon Cooks gets a slight uptick there. But it's the Philadelphia Eagles secondary, one of the best in the NFL currently, and so lower expectations for all Houston Texans. I want to quickly double back on the Eagles here and talk about Miles Sanders, who, we watched Derrick Henry run all over the Texans last week. I do expect a big game from Miles Sanders in this one because it's a great matchup.
Yeah, unless Jalen Hurts takes it all for himself, but I think it is likely that Sanders will do well. I agree with that. But we're both picking the Eagles in this one to win Thursday Night Football.
No upset here. They stay undefeated.
No. All right, we'll move on to Sunday, Chargers at Falcons. The Chargers were on bye in Week 8. This team's really struggling with injuries, both offensively and defensively. I know that much at least. So that is disappointing for them. This AFC West division is not looking as amazing as it once was touted to be going into the season, but we'll see what happens. Austin Eckler saw his highest snap percentage, 77% in Week 7, so that's great. You traded for him. We talked about it a little bit last week. And, you're feeling like he's legitimately elite, would you say, for Eckler?
For sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then with the pass catchers, Mike Williams is out for multiple weeks due to his high ankle sprain. I believe that he's almost certainly not going to play this week.
Oh, yeah.
Them having the bye last week was pretty good timing for him, but alas. Keenan Allen didn't practice on Monday. I don't know about Wednesday. Check on that, but just stay monitoring that hamstring injury that continues to plague him. If I was a Keenan Allen manager, I'd be very annoyed with that. He's played 2 games this season, and all over one hamstring injury, so that's rough.
Yeah,
do you have any sort of update on Wednesday's practice potentially?
Yes, he did not practice on Wednesday.
Okay.
Continue to monitor him as he progresses. He's been day to day for months now, as we kind of joke around here, but. This is a situation that is obviously not ideal. This hamstring injury is lingering, and it's definitely causing some frustration. He's a super talented player when he's healthy, but at some point you kind of have to maybe cut ties and salvage what you can with the season that's remaining. What are your thoughts on that, Carson?
Yeah, it's difficult. I feel like you're saying, what are you proposing that a manager that has him does?
Trade him away to a team that can afford to keep him on their bench.
I think that's fair. If he is really dragging down, because he should be, with how you drafted him, your wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1. So if you haven't had a good replacement there, I do agree that someone might see it as an enticing option if their depth was better than they had expected. So I think that is fair. So potential people that could fill in for the absence of Williams and even Keenan Allen this week would be Gerald Everett, has seen 16 targets across his past 2 games. And also Joshua Palmer, who I believe has been out, let me check this real quick, since Week 6. But in Week 6, he had 9 receptions on 12 targets. So do you like both of those potentially as being fill-in options, or one of them more?
I'm even thinking that DeAndre Carter could be a sneaky flex option this week. Given how barren this wide receiving room is set to be if both of those players miss in Williams and Allen.
I think that's fair because Herbert's got to throw the ball to someone, and I'll talk about Herbert a little bit because go ahead, you got.
I'm just gonna say I think that person's gonna be Austin Eckler.
That is true. He is definitely the player you want on this offense, and you got him. So, over Justin Herbert's past 2 games, he's thrown 2 passing touchdowns and 2 interceptions on 531 passing yards across 108 passing attempts. So, he's slinging it, but it's not really amounting to an incredible lot of great production. Herbert is currently the QB 13 after his bye. How do you value him? Do you feel like you still have to start him? for sure.
Well, this matchup doesn't concern me. Falcons
Sure.
defense just put up, or just allowed, I should say, 30-plus real NFL points to P.J. Walker. So
Yeah.
I think if there's a week where you feel good about starting Justin Herbert, it is going to be one of these weeks, although, the lack of options he has is concerning.
I think that is fair. Especially with where you drafted him, though, he probably is clearly your best option. Oh, okay, we'll talk about this differing. We're differing on who we're picking. We'll talk about that later. It is a close one, though. The Falcons, though, I'll talk about specifically. Both Cordell Patterson and Damian Williams are eligible to return from IR this week. I've never really wanted to have Tyler Algier or Caleb Huntley just because it's not a great offense. They're getting production, but they're splitting it. But now that Patterson's back, I feel like you can probably start Patterson and feel pretty good about it, but it's just another mouth to feed potentially, so maybe you wouldn't feel amazing about it. It seems like you have an opinion.
Yeah, I was just about to say, as of recording this, he's not officially cleared to play, but he is on schedule to make his return from IR. So I just want to
monitor that, of course.
Yeah, I want to clarify that, because if it's not a situation where Patterson or Williams are playing, I think that Algier probably remains fantasy relevant.
Okay, I think that's fair. So yeah, don't drop him unless you see confirmation on Patterson, most likely Patterson, but even Williams as well. Marcus Mariota had his season high in passing touchdowns in a game this season with 3 passing touchdowns. That's pretty good, and tied his season high pass completions in a game with 20. That's not as impressive.
Very
20
efficient.
being your season high in pass completions. Yeah, very efficient for sure. Yeah. So with Kyle Pitts, sell high is probably what I'm going to say. He had 19 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 9 targets, receiving touchdown. Do you agree?
I'm gonna push back a little bit on this because I think it's really tough. It's really tough to trade tight ends.
Sure.
There are so few elite or fringe elite options that when you have one of these players that has this kind of upside, I think you kind of got to stick with it. The problem is that, like, what do you get in return for Kyle Pitts unless you have maybe an Evan Ingram?
I know what you're saying.
in tow. Like, you know what I mean, though?
Yeah, I do. It's an awkward valuation, so I think that you could entertain using him as a trade piece, but I wouldn't force anything, so I do see what you're saying, because it is an awkward valuation. It's just about how maybe someone else could perceive that production and be like, this is the new norm all of a sudden, which I could be a little skeptical of. But
yeah.
And Drake London hasn't had more than 4 receptions since week 2, so he started the season very strong.
Yeah,
but
this makes my bold
inconsistent.
my bold prediction of Drake London getting double-digit receiving touchdowns. It makes it really hard to accomplish. So
yeah, but it was looking feasible. Surprisingly,
early
after
on.
the first 2 weeks of the season. But
that being
I'm
said,
picking the Chargers and you're picking the Falcons, and I think it is a close one. I definitely think it is.
I'm gonna.
I just think.
I was just gonna say I'm gonna bank on Keenan Allen not playing in this one, and so I think that's enough for the Falcons. Who, by the way, the Chargers lost 37-23 prior to their Week 8 bye against the Seahawks. So the Falcons can certainly get it done at home.
I'm just looking at it as more as I think they can bounce back from that after a bye week, but that is true, and that can't be. I feel like that was kind of overlooked because their bye week was nicely timed to have people not really focus on that. So there's a difference between us. All right, we'll move on to Dolphins at Bears. I won't be picking the Bears again.
That's fair.
Tua Tagovailoa threw for 382 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns in Week 8, so that's great. I saw on social media, I believe, that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are the fastest teammates to combine for 1,600 receiving yards in a season. That's incredible. They're both averaging like almost 100 receiving yards a game. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And that shows this offense, if you forgot, is a passing offense when Tua is healthy. So here you go. But they did trade away a running back, as we already mentioned, of Chase Edmonds to the Broncos. And this is more evidence that the Dolphins believe in Raheem Mostert as their backup, or as their lead back, but not so fast. As San Francisco agreed to send Jeff Wilson Jr. to Miami, a reunion with head coach Mike McDaniel, which I think that is interesting because he coached both of those players as the offensive coordinator when they were both in San Francisco. Is that right? All right. I think that is interesting. So I guess I'll ask you. How do you value Edmonds and Wilson? I have them both. So do you think this is good for them, bad for them, neutral after this move?
I think it's borderline neutral and or a slight downgrade for Chase Edmonds. He's just Denver is throwing so many running backs at the wall to see what sticks. You've got Latavius Murray, Melvin Gordon, Marlon Mack, and Mike Boone on IR, and now Chase Edmonds is in the mix. I don't think all of those players remain long term, meaning the remainder of the season. But Chase Edmonds is definitely seemingly buried on that depth chart. And for Jeff Wilson, you have a new handcuff. He went from a handcuff in San Francisco to a handcuff in Miami. So not great.
Yeah, not really. As someone who has Raheem Mostert, I'm glad that I happen to have Jeff Wilson now as the handcuff just automatically. So that's kind of fun. But I agree with you, Chase Edmonds, who will be on bye this week, as we've already noted.
Yeah.
If he does very little in week 10, I think you can drop him.
Yeah, probably.
But maybe even now. But I would probably still hold on to him, honestly.
Through the bye? Why?
Who knows? Why not? Unless there's a better...
I think he's droppable is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
If you need to.
He is.
Yeah.
But I think that I would personally like to see what happens in week 10.
As a Broncos fan, I completely get that.
Yeah. Okay. We'll move on to the Bears, who acquired Chase Claypool from the Steelers via trade. I think this has to be... Oh, God, that's actually difficult to say. No, I don't know. No, it's probably neutral.
We're talking about upgrade/downgrade or neutral on the move for Claypool.
Probably neutral.
I think it is. I think it has the potential for a slight upgrade because you got to think going from, probably the number 3 to the number 2 passing option is promising. The real challenge is going to be, and as you have it noted here, Justin Fields has... his season high in pass completions is 17, so that's extremely low for the passing volume on this offense. Claypool is a talented player at times, does have that nice end zone threat build. He's a tall guy. I think he's around 6'5", 6'4", and
I think he is.
that makes a good target for contested catches in the red zone. But the problem is that when the Bears are running as effectively as they are, I believe they're still leading the league in rushing.
I think I've heard that. I think they're definitely near the top.
Limits the upside. So
for sure,
mostly a neutral move, possibly an upgrade if the passing offense improves.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to see if it can become a beneficiary. I don't know. He was borderline droppable going into this, so I guess anything could be good, but we'll just see what happens. All right, I'll talk about those running backs that we kind of alluded to. So David Montgomery on 70% of snaps had 8.5 fantasy points, 15 carries for 53 yards, 3 receptions, 22 yards, and a fumble. And then Khalil Herbert, meanwhile, on 28% of snaps, so way fewer, but he had 16 rushes for 99 yards and a rushing touchdown. So what's going on here? I feel like this is like 3 straight weeks in a row where Herbert has been way more efficient than Montgomery.
Yeah, what this reminds me of is the Dallas backfield. You've got kind of an aging star in Zeke, who's obviously being shown up by the less used Tony Pollard. Yeah. This is kind of the same scenario here we find with Chicago. So I think Khalil Herbert needs to be rostered in more leagues than he is currently. David Montgomery seems to be kind of losing his grip on this backfield based on production. I don't know if the coaching staff will necessarily make that change because they have been quoted as saying that, we like our 1-2 punch in Montgomery and Herbert. So I think Herbert is an upside stash, and, with Montgomery, based on him getting the starting reps, you're probably going to have to continue to start him. But it's not a great matchup in general.
That's what's difficult about it. There's not going to be a reality where they're just like, they're going to bench Montgomery for Herbert when Montgomery's healthy. So it becomes a lot like that Dallas backfield. So I agree with that. We'll wait and see what happens. So we're both picking the Dolphins in this one. Probably not too bold. Not as bold as I was last week. And we'll move on to Panthers at Bengals. So with the Panthers, Deontay Foreman boomed for 31.8 fantasy points. Back-to-back games with 100-plus rushing yards, but only 2 receptions across those 2 games. Chuba Hubbard was inactive in Week 8. That is a key thing to note. But how do you value D'Onta Foreman going forward?
Well, I think he's an RB2, but I also like the prospect of selling high on these back-to-back big weeks for D'Onta Foreman.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I sold high on him going into Week 8, so prior to this performance, but and I know that you're bitter because you considered picking him up, but then just seemingly didn't.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say I literally was a click away from just dropping Jeff Wilson for D'Onta Foreman, so I'm just gonna tell myself, hey, Chuba Hubbard is going to make this to where Foreman is not going to be that great, and I kept Wilson, who's my handcuff for Mostert. It was all planned all along.
There's a lot of copium going on over there.
Yep, that is what's happening.
But no, I think that Chuba Hubbard returning does complicate matters. I think if you can capitalize on Foreman's, he's been operating as a lead back in these past 2 weeks. If you can capitalize off of that, that would be ideal, because the volume and the usage is going to likely reduce when Hubbard is healthy.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that this is Foreman's peak value.
Mm-hmm.
Almost certainly. Right now. Talk about someone who could potentially be at their peak value, but maybe not. DJ Moore, 27.5 fantasy points, 6 receptions on 11 targets, a receiving touchdown, 152 receiving yards, and even a rush for 3 yards. Sell high or hold? DJ Moore.
I think with DJ Moore, we're probably going to want to lean more towards holding, and I think that might be a little controversial. Agree. Okay, good.
I do kind of agree, actually.
So this is kind of more reminiscent of the player that we saw from DJ Moore last year. A lot of targets, not the most efficient in those targets, but he's getting the volume. He doesn't have a lot of competition, especially with Christian McCaffrey now gone. In the passing game, and so I think that DJ Moore is kind of the big fish in the little pond on this team.
I think that's fair. The only other pass catcher you can really name is second-year wide receiver Terrace Marshall, who saw 9 targets while playing 93% of snaps in Week 8. Is he worthy of a waiver acquisition or not?
I don't know. I think we talked about early in the season with I'm drawing a blank on his name, Robbie Anderson. And how he showed some signs early in the year and then kind of disappeared. Now, obviously, that was under Baker Mayfield, and now we're in the P.J. Walker era. And potentially, I'll say, it's we've yet to see 2 fantasy-relevant wide receivers out of this offense. So if you have the space on your bench, feel free to pick up Terrace Marshall, see what he does in the coming weeks. This is not necessarily a week where I'm putting him out there, although there are 6 teams on a bye. But more likely than not, if you were talking about picking him up off of waivers, you may already be rostering better options.
All right, I agree. We're talking about the Bengals, who were surprisingly dominated by the Browns in Week 8 in Monday Night Football. I'll read this stat straight from a PFF article. Chris Evans, who is listed as the Bengals' 3rd running back on their depth chart, played 1 snap in the first half. On that play, he caught a 26-yard pass. He was leading the team in receiving yards for the first 40 minutes of the game. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, it was. Well, if you watched any of that game, you would have thought the Bengals had too much candy before the game because they looked lethargic and they looked like underprepared for this game, really. The play calling was very conservative, a lot of checkdowns. I mean, as you mentioned later on, Joe Mixon had 7 receptions in this game. He was getting targeted out of the backfield constantly, and it just felt like without Jamar Chase there, the Cincinnati Bengals looked confused and lost. Like, oh God, how do we play football? Like, it was weird. Yeah,
and to add on to that, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd were both unproductive other than getting a touchdown to save their respective fantasy days. And it is difficult. Chase will be out for another few weeks, I believe.
Multiple weeks.
So you have to assume that Higgins and Boyd will step up. So do you think this is an opportunity to buy low on them?
I think that it's going to be difficult to buy low on them because everyone should understand the roles that they currently exist in with Jamar Chase out. I was almost thinking when I saw these notes that you were asking if we should buy low on Jamar Chase. and that's certainly an option if you're comfortably in the lead in your league,
That's
and
fair
you
too.
can afford to hold on to Jamar Chase for a few weeks. That might be a great choice. But for Higgins and Boyd, I think that their value has taken an uptick in the news that Chase has been either placed on IR or headed to IR. Yeah, the problem that I really feel like is apparent with this Monday night game was that both players pretty much got lucky and sort of bailed out on their touchdowns.
Yeah.
Tyler Boyd's touchdown catch was tipped by a defender before it found his hands, and with T. Higgins, it was a clear 50-50 ball that just Higgins got up and went up and got it. So
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned about this offense moving forward, although Carolina at home for Cincinnati is a good matchup for them to bounce back.
Yeah. For sure, it could be kind of a reset for them, which we thought we saw 2 weeks ago. But
yeah, and then
we'll see if they
a
can
week
bounce
10,
back.
a week 10 bye coming up, so maybe a chance to kind of recollect and
Sure.
improve on that game plan moving forward.
Yeah, despite our concerns about this offense, we're both picking them to beat the Panthers.
Yeah.
We'll move on to Packers at Lions divisional matchup. So, the Packers, always so fun to talk about. Aaron Rodgers' season high for passing yards in a game came in week 3 with 255. I was surprised. That seems very low. It's not surprising with how we've been talking about this offense, but still something to note because that's very low for him halfway through a season to be a season high. Rodgers had 19 pass completions in week 8. That's very low too. So, yeah, not great for him, with obviously feeling the pains of missing Devontae Adams. It's been rough for this team, and I saw a lot of memes about like this whole division. I don't even which division this NFC whatever
North.
it is with the Packers, NFC North. A lot of the 3 other teams were kind of active on the trade deadline day, and the Packers were doing nothing. I just saw memes about Rodgers wanting a wide receiver, and just nope, we're not going to get one. It is kind of surprising. But the wide receivers they do have, Romeo Doubs.
I did hear that they were
got
in the
anything to add?
mix. I did hear they were in the mix for Chase Claypool, but couldn't get it done.
Oh, interesting. That would have been interesting. Yeah, I guess. You would think that maybe someone can step up. That's what we've been saying halfway through this entire season, but it's not really happening.
Yeah, I was
It's not really
hoping,
happening.
and of course, this is hindsight, but I was hoping that, Brandon Cooks or Jerry Jeudy might find their way onto a different roster at the deadline, and Packers would have been a great landing spot for either of those guys.
Yeah, I would have loved to see Cooks go somewhere else, but Judy needs to stay. But I did see definitely a lot of toxic.
What did he
being
do
dealt.
to hurt you?
Nothing. Okay, I see. Romeo Doubs found the end zone to help his fantasy day, but still only had 4 receptions, even while Alan Lazard was inactive.
Yeah.
So that's not great. He didn't take advantage of that opportunity, really.
Well, that's because their game plan was pound the rock.
Yeah, and you see it here. Aaron Jones had 143 rushing yards on 20 carries and 4 receptions, and A.J. Dillon even had 10 carries, so 30 carries just between the two of them. But would you be trying to trade Jones if he was on your fantasy roster, I guess kind of as a sell high? Or do you think he legitimately has the volume to be consistently in that even low-end RB1 discussion?
I definitely wouldn't be trading him heading into a matchup against the Lions. They're one of the worst rush defenses, one of the worst defenses in general in the NFL. So, if anything, I'm holding on one more week. Now, of course, if he doesn't impress, then that kind of lowers his value trade-wise. But I still think that this is a great spot for him to perform well in, and not something that I'm looking to get rid of right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You're kind of taking a little bit of risk waiting another week, but he could definitely boom again against the Lions, which would make his value even higher. So we'll talk about the Lions. T.J. Hawkinson traded to division rival Vikings. I kind of forgot about that aspect of it when I saw that happen. As Irv Smith's high ankle sprain will likely keep him sidelined for 8 to 10 weeks. I think that this is honestly great for Hawkinson. We'll talk about him later, right?
Yes.
The Vikings later on, probably?
Yep.
We can save that discussion for later then. He wasn't really getting utilized a whole lot in the Lions offense because, this whole offense is around Amon-Ra St. Brown as a pass catcher. And he was targeted the most by far among Lions pass catchers, seeing a total of 10 targets, of which he caught 7. So that's good. He's obviously always making your starting lineup. Jamal Williams had 2 rushing touchdowns on 13 total touches. So I'm going to say that he's probably not going to repeat that. And we've been saying that a lot this year, but he's just been wildly efficient.
He is second in the NFL in rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, wildly efficient. And I think that DeAndre Swift having 10 touches in total is a lot to do with the fact that this was his first game back from injury since week 3. So I expect him to just be way more involved this week, another week, hopefully off of that injury that he was dealing with.
Jamal Williams kind of reminds me of, kind of some early season CEH production. Limited number of touches, but the touchdowns are there. And so Jamal Williams kind of persists as a touchdown-dependent flex. He's not a player that I would want on my roster, considering how volatile that usage can be. It can result in some 3-point games. It can result in some 15-point games. So, but that is kind of the case that we're finding with this Lions backfield. And yeah, like you said, DeAndre Swift limited in his first game back. But I think obviously better days ahead for him. He has been one of the bright stars on this Lions offense.
Yeah, for sure. So I agree that better days are ahead as well. I think that Jamal Williams and this backfield, kind of not exactly a 1-for-1 comparison, but kind of early season Cardinals last season with Connor and Edmonds a little bit. Connor was just wildly efficient with his touchdowns, but I definitely think he had more of a role in that offense than Jamal Williams is misleading you into thinking he has in this offense. But we're both picking the Packers to win this. Away from home, they're the favorites. Divisional matchup, I expect Rodgers to just get the win. And I think that, the Lions might struggle a little bit, even though Hockenson wasn't super involved. He'd been there for the past few years being involved, so I think that maybe it could hurt their offense a little bit to go out there without him so soon. Potentially.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
All right, we'll move on to Raiders at Jaguars. So you picking the Jaguars. All right. It's a close one, close spread on this one. But the Raiders were shut out by the Saints 24-0 in Week 8 in New Orleans. So that's not great. The Raiders put in some backups in the fourth quarter. That's how bad it was. Davante Adams had 1 reception for 3 yards after accumulating in his past 3 games 20 receptions and 320 receiving yards. So that's obviously showing you that I think he's a buy low candidate. Do you agree?
Yeah,
if you might take the perspective that how low can you really get Davante Adams for?
I mean, that's one argument. The other side is that Davante Adams has, outside of this game, generally been very effective. I'm going to pull up his game log here really quick. The real question is how did they only manage to get 5 targets in this game? This is a player that in week 1 he saw 17 targets. So what exactly is Vegas doing on the scheming side of things to not generate some more looks for Davante Adams in this game? It's just kind of without Marshawn Lattimore again, by the way. So it's not as though he was getting shadowed and just pressed into the dirt. These are backup corners or second string corners that are taking on Davante Adams, and it's kind of baffling. But this is only his second single digit performance of the season. I think it's going to be hard to really quote unquote buy low on Davante Adams.
That's fair.
And it's not a player that I'm necessarily considering trading off of my team either, because he has been so effective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people need to put a little bit more respect on his name. I've seen some perspectives on social media that maybe Davante Adams was only so good because he had Aaron Rodgers for all of his career. No,
that must have been people that
Davante
just watched last week.
Legit.
That was people. That was people that were preying on his downfall and took the opportunity to finally speak up because he hasn't given them that opportunity. That's ridiculous.
I agree. That is ridiculous. We'll move on to Josh Jacobs.
Don't give the haters light.
Yeah. Don't listen to them. They're wrong. Josh Jacobs, also a buy low candidate potentially, which I think that's more likely because he started the season at a much lower value than he was after he boomed the previous few weeks. But he had 7.4 fantasy points, 10 carries, 43 yards, 2 receptions. Yeah, so you agree? You think you should maybe go after him?
Well, you're not going to be able to get him. That's the thing. he's coming off minus this game, which negative game script is always bad for running backs that don't get a lot of involvement in the passing game. But back to back to back 30-plus point games at running back, you can't trade that away. I think if you were to panic on this one game and sell Josh Jacobs, you'd be making a major mistake. We just talked about him being a potential league winner last week.
I agree. I think that me saying buy low is a little bit synonymous with you trust that there are better days ahead because you would be wanting to buy him at his current price. So
okay, well, sure.
We agree on that.
Yeah.
We agree on that. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it because it would be not a good idea to sell him as I agree with you, but that's why, hey, maybe throw out an offer. You never know how desperate someone could be.
I suppose.
You never know. All right, we'll move on to the Jaguars. ETN season. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad how this trajectory has changed for him as having him on my team. But 27 total touches, 156 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown against the Broncos in London last week. Amazing. I believe the only players that had more rushing yards than this was before the Monday game, so I don't know if Nick Chubb may have changed this. But the only player that had more rushing yards was Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry after contact were the only players who had more rushing yards than Travis Etienne last week. I thought that was a funny stat.
Yeah.
Anyways, Trevor Lawrence threw 2 interceptions on 133 passing yards and 18 completions. Not great, but do you believe that there are better days ahead for him and his pass catchers, or do you think that Etienne is going to make this kind of a run-first offense?
No, I definitely believe in Trevor Lawrence still, and this is a fantastic matchup. We just watched Andy Dalton throw all over the Raiders last week, so why can't Trevor Lawrence, who has shown signs of that second-year improvement, do the same thing against them this week at home? We're both picking the Jags to win this one, and I think that's a good call.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree with you. The only other Jaguars player I'll talk about specifically is Evan Ingram, who you actually mentioned a little bit earlier. 15.5 fantasy points, 4 receptions, receiving touchdown. Played 93% of snaps. That's great usage, I think higher than really he ever had at the Giants, I was seeing. Across his previous 3 games, Ingram had 23 targets, 15 receptions, and 176 receiving yards. That's pretty good, reliable numbers across the 3-game stretch. So I'll ask you, worthy of any waiver acquisition for your team?
I've been talking about him for weeks now. You're finally catching on.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, Evan Ingram is definitely one of the targets at tight end to be looking to get on your roster. This is even a player that you could potentially, trade for. Like, I would be happy packaging Kyle Pitts and a player for Evan Ingram and a better player. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
this is a player that has shown more consistent usage at the position to kind of open up an opportunity for maybe dealing Kyle Pitts if you so choose.
Yeah, and let's not forget how good and consistent he was at the Giants early on in his career when he was healthy. So he has that ability. He just has to stay healthy, and he has so far this season. Yeah, we're both picking the Jaguars, as we said, and we will move on to Colts at Patriots. So the Colts traded away Nyheim Hines to the Bills in exchange for Zach Moss. Yippee. I don't really see Zach Moss having a ton of standalone volume, but Jonathan Taylor is dealing with some injuries that I think is keeping him out of practice. So monitor that because I don't know how likely it is for Zach Moss to be some sort of workhorse back that Taylor hasn't even really been.
No,
but
it would probably be...
Deion Jackson? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
I agree.
Deion Jackson, we've already seen from him that he can fill in and do a fantastic job. The problem is, even if Jonathan Taylor does play, the Patriots are one of the best run defenses in the league, and I know that Chicago had their way with them a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But only allowing, I believe, 2 rushing touchdowns on the season to running backs.
That is that's a good stat for that defense for sure.
Yeah.
Hines had the most fantasy points out of any Colts player in Week 8 on only 7 touches. I thought that was kind of a little fun fact for this offense. That's not great. I keep on pitching buy low, but I think this may be a better question. Buy low on Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, certainly it's in consideration. I think he's nearing his season low value. Jonathan Taylor has definitely struggled this season, and I think that the change at quarterback maybe makes things a little bit worse considering that Ellinger has, or Ellinger, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but either way, has a lot more utility with his legs than Matt Ryan did. And so, maybe there's some goal line touches that get taken away from Jonathan Taylor for a QB sneak or, a scramble type play. So, yeah, with Jonathan Taylor, I mean, the problem is, like, how realistic do you think it is that he returns to the player that we saw late last season?
Not super likely, but I think him being projected 14 point something going into a week is very low for what I think he probably will end up climbing back up to. I mean, this is a player you'd be expecting to have a projection of like 20 plus points every week, so that's just so much lower.
Yeah, but he's only got one game on the season over 20 points, and that was in week 1 at Houston, one of the worst rush defenses in the league. So
I know.
I think we're kind of seeing that, Jonathan Taylor is obviously not a fraud, but not worthy of the number 1 pick after all, which is unfortunate for a lot of people.
Yeah, and for you that ended up with McCaffrey in both of your sleeper leagues, kind of against your own will because you were the second pick, it seems to be working out for you.
Yeah,
and it also is a lot to say, and we'll talk about this next offseason, I'm sure. Just you need to draft players at their peak value. Like, honestly, there's no surefire Jonathan Taylor safe, McCaffrey's a risk. Well, obviously this is evidence that you can't even predict off of like past injury history. And it's not like been injuries that have really been limiting Taylor's usage, although he's been injured more than he usually has because he usually never was injured. But you can't use that logic of fear, honestly. You gotta just have to go off of their peak value. That's kind of what I'm taking away from this.
No, and I would say, if anything, this is more reminiscent of the fall that we saw Christian McCaffrey experience with his injury history. He was a lock-in, just absolute reliable bell cow back, and then he started racking up the injuries and became less reliable. This season, he's not dealing with injuries, and you're seeing him return to form as the player that you know and love from years past. So, if anything, I think that the comparisons between those two players are more prevalent than ever.
Yeah. And I just got to get this fun fact out because we can't talk about the 49ers too much because they're on bye, but McCaffrey's the first player to throw a passing touchdown, have a rushing touchdown, and have a receiving touchdown in the same game since I think LaDainian Tomlinson in 2006 is what I think it was. So that was a fun fact for you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Sam Ellinger's, that's what I'll say, here's for the pronunciations, debut. 17 for 23, 201 passing yards, and 6 carries for 15 rushing yards. So he had a very high completion percentage, but didn't throw for a ton of passing yards or completions. And I believe 3 of those 6 carries were on designed runs. So obviously that's different for how they would have used Matt Ryan or Carson Wentz or Phillip Rivers, just going back a few years of their offensive QBs. Their QBs. That is interesting. They've kind of been pivoting the old dudes around. But Michael Pittman still saw 9 targets and 7 receptions on these limited passing numbers. And Alec Pierce was second on the team for targets. So Sam Ellinger's throwing to the quote-unquote right people based off of value going into his debut. So you expect him to hopefully carry on with that completion percentage and throw the ball more, and maybe you can feel confident about those players. That's what I'm taking away from it, at least.
Fair enough.
All right, we can talk about the Patriots, which I believe this is your notes now.
Yeah, I want to talk about the running backs, obviously. Ramondre Stevenson continues to lead this backfield, playing 63% of the snaps, kind of reverting back to that 60-40 split that we were seeing prior to Damian Harris's injury. Stevenson had 16 rushes for 71 yards and caught 7 of 8 targets. That's 8 targets in back-to-back games. So he is definitely emerging as the pass-catching back and the lead rusher in this offense. This is a win-win. If you rostered or drafted Stevenson, I'll say. Damian Harris on the other side, kind of a touchdown-dependent flex, which is unfortunate as a Patriots fan to see him kind of slipping in this team. I don't necessarily see him coming back or being a part of the Patriots' future for much longer. Moving on to Jakobi Meyers. Do you have something to add?
I'm almost a little surprised that they didn't trade him. Do you think were you expecting them to potentially try and trade Damian Harris?
No, I wasn't. I think they like having two,
That is true.
reliable running backs in their offense is a big part of their scheme. But
Bill likes his depth for sure, that running back position.
Exactly. So with Jacoby Myers, he seems to be back as a high-end wide receiver 3 with upside. He caught 9 of his 12 targets for 60 yards and a touchdown. And how about Jacoby Myers? In I believe 3 of the last 4 games, he's catching touchdowns, it's just so great to see.
I know. I love seeing it for him because I had him on my team last season, and he was honestly a meme when he finally got his receiving touchdown. And now it's not a meme anymore. He is legit. He's getting those receiving touchdowns, high production. I like to see it for him for sure.
Yeah.
I believe also that I saw. Sorry, this is unrelated. This is back to Ramondre Stevenson, but I believe that since week 3, he's the PPR RB3. So that's kind of a fun fact. I like that because I have him.
Okay, so we're both picking the Patriots to win this one at home. Good news on that front. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is Bills at the Vikings. Bills at the Jets.
Huge spread.
Yes, division matchup. 12.5-point underdogs are the Jets at home. We love to see that. Josh Allen showed a little bit of rest coming off of a bye, completing just 13 of his 25 attempts for 218 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 questionable interceptions based on, why did you throw those? But 49 yards on the ground from 6 rushes. This is his first multiple INT game since week 1, so not really concerned, but just some questionable decisions on Josh Allen's part. Coming in Week 8 on Sunday Night Football. Stephon Diggs continues his dominance at the wide receiver position, trailing only Tyreek Hill in PPR scoring through 8 weeks. That's unexpected. And then let's talk about Gabe Davis for a moment. Disappointed fantasy managers in a big way on Sunday Night Football. He only managed to catch 2 of his 7 targets for a lowly 35 receiving yards. This is a player that we've seen take a 98-yarder to the house and big play upside. Efficiency can be a problem whenever you're the deep threat in an offense, but it's a Josh Allen-led offense. So he saw a season high in targets. That's a good sign, but a season low in efficiency to go along with that. Is Gabe Davis a player you're trading for or trading away if you roster him?
I think you know my perspective on Gabe Davis. I would say for sure there are better days ahead for Gabe Davis after this performance because of the fact, like you said, he's in this Josh Allen-led offense. But going into Week 8, he was averaging like a receiving touchdown every 3.5 receptions. I don't really want that. And he's the second option. It is a great passing offense, but he's not even the first option. So personally for me, I would be trading away, but I do think there are better days. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, yeah, that's why I would trade away, because I think that there are... it's difficult. Trade away, that's what I'll say. I'm not going to try and appeal to the masses. I would not be targeting Davis, but I do expect better than 5.5 points.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on to Nyheim Hines, who, as we mentioned, was traded to Buffalo in exchange for Zach Moss and obviously some draft picks here and there. Carson, do you think this is an upgrade, a downgrade, or are you feeling like this move is neutral for Hines in fantasy?
It's probably pretty neutral. I'm trying to look up James Cook because I feel like he actually did something. Okay, not really, actually. Never mind.
He got some late-game rushing use.
Yeah, he did. Kind of got his 25% of snaps. He's only done better than that, higher than that once in week 2.
Yeah.
So it's a little surprising to see them kind of punt on him, him being their rookie that they were going to go for. Mm-hmm. And now they have Nyheim Hines. I think Hines does profile as a great option theoretically in this offense as a receiving running back. But, this is not a backfield I really want much stock in. So I think...
That's fair. I think, we talked about this is more of a real NFL move than a fantasy move in terms of upgrades, because Buffalo attempted to get J.D. McKissick in this previous offseason, didn't end up getting him. And now trading for Nyheim Hines. I think this is more just Buffalo kind of checking all the boxes. Do we have a good pass down running back? Yes. Do we have a good quarterback? Yes. Do we have a good wide receiver core? Yes. Like, they're just kind of, checking the boxes off. Getting Von Miller was a huge acquisition. So they are still the favorite to win the Super Bowl despite not being the undefeated team remaining in the NFL.
Yes, agreed.
and I don't think that's all that controversial. But
No.
yeah, this Hines acquisition I think is more for pursuing a ring and securing that championship win versus anything that you can really act on in fantasy.
I will say it probably has to be a upgrade by definition, just because he's going to a better offense, and his value before was kind of low because Nyheim Hines has never had really standalone consistent value. So him just going to a better offense automatically is an upgrade, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But this has been a backfield that you have not really wanted to be have a share in, as I previously said. So that's what I'll say about it.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and put it down here. I'll write it in for you. I think that we're both picking the Bills in this one. But the Jets did have two big winners on their team in Week 8. They were Tyler Conklin, 6 catches on 10 targets, 79 yards, and 2 TDs. And Garrett Wilson, 6 catches, 7 targets, 115 yards. Are you buying or selling on either of these players moving forward?
Probably selling, because it's a Zach Wilson-led offense, as we love to note. Although, it is great to see that production from Wilson as a rookie. I'm more skeptical of Conklin because 2 of your 6 catches are a touchdown. But he had been looking good, but not really with Wilson.
Not with Wilson, yeah.
With Zach Wilson, that is. Not Garrett Wilson. The Wilson brothers, Garrett Wilson and Zach Wilson. They have that chemistry. That's why he's staying consistent, I guess.
Something tells me they're not related.
What? Yeah, but no, I'd probably sell because I don't really want a stock in this passing offense, or probably this offense in general. Although I see that we're not focusing too much on James Robinson.
Well,
I do expect him to.
Yeah, the reason we're not really talking about James Robinson here is because you're not going to start him against the Bills. And they're heading into a bye in Week 10, so we're going to have a few more weeks before we can really... And then New England after the bye. So it's going to be tough
and you
sledding.
never really expected him last week to just be like the every down back.
No, not on the very first week on the team. So that's definitely a wait-and-see type situation with him. Ready to move on?
Yeah.
All right, so next one we got is Vikings at Commanders. Kirk Cousins performed well off his Week 7 bye, completing 24 of 36 attempts for 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 22 rushing yards, with an additional score using his legs. You like to see that. 6 teams are on a bye this week, yet surprisingly few fantasy-relevant QBs are missing. Has Cousins earned starter consideration in a revenge game at Washington?
I think so. Especially if that many teams on bye. I think that... Although it might be difficult to predict how involved TJ Hawkinson will be the same week he got traded to them, I think that definitely is a big upgrade for Cousins to have a third reliable option. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's not even including the running backs either. So
exactly.
Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson, as you were alluding to, remain lineup locks. Adam Thielen continues to serve as a flex with upside. He only has 2 touchdowns on the season, and that's following a combined total of 24 receiving touchdowns over the previous 2 years. So we do expect some positive regression for Adam Thielen in this one. And then TJ Hawkinson, like you said, traded to the Vikings. I think their window as a team, as a franchise, with the current roster that they have, the window to win it all is closing sooner rather than later. Obviously, you have Kirk Cousins aging. You have Justin Jefferson playing on his rookie contract. So, they're kind of in win-now mode, and they should be with a 6-1 record. Or 6-1.
Have a very easy route to win that division.
Yeah, definitely.
Or not necessarily a route, but just very easy chance.
Yeah, no, agreed. So I think this is a good move for the Vikings, picking up that, like you said, third reliable pass-catching option. And I don't blame you for going with that. I'm going to agree with you. I'm picking the Vikings in this one. Moving on to the Commanders, we have kind of a less desirable cast of characters here. Antonio Gibson led the running back by committee with 20.7 fantasy points on just 36% of the snaps, 7 rushes for 19 yards, and going 7 for 7 on targets for 58 yards and a touchdown. Back-to-back games with a receiving touchdown. Gibson still feels like a touchdown-dependent flex based on his snap percentage, and I mean, single-digit rushing attempts. That's not really something that you're chasing after in in fantasy. And Brian Robinson saw a significant drop in snaps, 25%, only rushing 8 times for 20 yards. He's not doing himself any favors with that kind of stat line. You likely weren't starting him in PPR formats to begin with, but would you consider Robinson as a player to stash or possibly buy low on?
I'm trying to look up his 0 receptions. I think
that's why I mentioned the PPR formats. Like in standard leagues, maybe it's a little bit more appealing, but in PPR, he's either going to be volume dependent or touchdown dependent.
I think he's a stash no matter what, because theoretically we knew how this team valued him going into the season, but the drop in snaps is not great. But I wouldn't be buying low because I really don't want a piece of this backfield. But don't drop him.
That's fair. Yeah.
But don't buy low either.
Yeah, important to note that, when week 11 rolls around, he's playing Houston. So we'll talk about that
maybe
eventually. No, not maybe. It's definite. Moving on to the pass catchers, Terry McLaurin continues to prosper with the return of Taylor Heineke at quarterback. We like to see that. Curtis Samuel feels like a flex at best, as his high volume of targets that we saw from him in the first month of the season have shifted to a much more inconsistent situation as of late. His snap percentage has decreased in 4 consecutive weeks, going from 90 down to 74. Is that news or noise to you?
I think it's a little bit of news, but it's kind of already embedded in his value, going from a low-end wide receiver 2, honestly, to start the season, to a flex. So I think that kind of is embedded in that value. And I think it has a lot to do with Taylor Heineke just being more familiar with McLaurin, and therefore he's been more consistent. So I don't think that it's like... I think his value is depreciating rightfully, and I don't think it's going to get much worse.
Okay, that's fair. And then I didn't really have any notes about it, but I did want to mention Jahan Dotson still kind of struggling through that hamstring issue of his own. I think you'll agree with me in saying that whenever Jahan Dotson does finally get back in the starting lineup, I would probably hold him on my bench just 1 week to see how his usage is with Taylor Heineke at quarterback. Probably a lack of chemistry there in general with Dotson not getting a lot of practice reps. So something to monitor there moving forward, but also once he's back, you may have to wait 1 extra week to get him in your lineup.
Yeah, to start the season, going into drafts, we thought McLaurin would be the only consistent option in this offense, and it's kind of getting back to being that point, but it didn't start the season necessarily that way.
Yeah, not at all. All right, let's move on to the first afternoon games, the late slate, if you will. And that's Seahawks at Cardinals. We've already seen these teams face off once. It was a 9-19 barn burner. So interesting to see if that will repeat, with Cardinals being the home team in this one. For the Seahawks, we finally saw a modest fantasy performance for Ken Walker. He's been kind of lighting the world on fire since he took the starting job. But he rushed 18 times for 51 yards and a touchdown. Also caught 1 of 2 targets for a yard. So limited usage in the passing game still. Still managing to find the end zone, but only got you about 12 points in this one. He remains a lineup lock given his volume. I don't think there's any arguing that.
No, I agree.
Yeah, so we can move on to the pass catchers. DK Metcalf, who saw 10 targets last week, and Tyler Lockett, who saw 8 targets of his own, are both high upside plays at wide receiver. However, not a great matchup, given as how we've already seen these teams play each other. Metcalf had 5.4 fantasy points, and Lockett had 3.7 when they faced off last time.
And which week did they play each other, if you can remember that?
I'll pull it up for you. 1 sec.
Yeah. Because that might have something to do with it a little bit, in my opinion. But yeah, still I would...
It was at Seattle in week 6, not too long ago.
Okay, so not too long ago. So yeah, this probably is legit. If it was very early, I'd probably be more inclined to be like, maybe this offense has gotten better. Found its identity, as we said a lot last episode.
Yeah.
But it's probably more accurate that it was more recent, and now it's in Arizona. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to say in general, Arizona's been good about defending wide receivers. So probably something there, more likely than nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Moving on to the Cardinals on this one, James Conner with his ribs issue has been deemed day-to-day. Monitor his status. He's missed 3 straight games heading into Week 9. And then DeAndre Hopkins puts up monster numbers in back-to-back weeks, catching 12 of 13 targets for 159 yards and a touchdown. You love to see that.
I think he's leading like every receiving stat since he's been back.
Yeah, I mean,
across the league.
He is, like I said, putting up monster numbers. He's Kyler's number 1 target, his number 2 target, maybe even his number 3 target. With Rondale Moore, we talked about him last week, kind of saying, are you leaning towards trusting him as your flex or giving him 1 week to prove it? And if you gave him that trust, he definitely paid off. 23.4 fantasy points in Week 8. 8 or more targets in 3 of the last 4 games, and 6 or more receptions per game in that same span.
I gave him 1 week to prove it, and that he did.
We're picking different on this one. I'm taking the Seahawks on the road. You are choosing the Cardinals in this one at home. They're the 2-point favorite, and I want to double-check who won that game against Seattle. I'm not
Last
sure.
week? Or
no,
when they last played?
Yeah, when they last played.
When they last
played, they allowed 19 points, so they lost that game. I'm picking the Seahawks to sweep the series.
I thought you were going to join me a little bit, but you are pulling from relevant stats, so fair enough. Got to go with my Cardinals. They're not the favorites a whole lot.
Yeah,
surprisingly.
All right, let's talk about Rams at Bucks next. Cooper Kupp is expected to play after suffering an ankle injury last week. Gave some fantasy managers some anxiety in that scenario, but he looks like he's going to play this week, so that's good. Monitor his status. For Allen Robinson, he is flirting with flex numbers, catching 5 of 7 targets for 54 yards last week. 6 or more. I'm going to make a claim, make a case for him, and you can.
I know.
You can push back if you want. 6 or more targets in 3 of his last 4 games. Double-digit fantasy scoring in back-to-back games. With 6 teams on a bye, it's important to note that. Does Robinson warrant flex consideration?
I just feel like the ceiling's so low with him. If Kupp is somehow out, even though that doesn't seem to be where it's trending, definitely I would be starting Robinson.
Okay.
But I think that you can find better options. I just need to see something better than a measly 10.4 points from 5 catches. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Right.
I don't feel too bad about having him on my bench, and it's not like he burned me last week. He just did all right.
Yeah.
So he's got to prove it to me even more because he did burn me to start the season. So I guess I'm maybe a little bit tender about that.
That's completely understandable. Speaking of, Tyler Higbee only caught 2 of his 6 targets for 15 yards in Week 8. Back in Week 6, he also had a very bad game, another single-digit performance. This is his 3rd single-digit fantasy performance in 7 games played this season. Temporarily left the game last week with a neck injury, so that's not a good sign. Monitor his status for this matchup. I think if you can, maybe start someone else in his place. I mean, It depends because Higbee was not a highly drafted player, so you likely picked him up off of waivers and rode with him for the first month or so of the season, but he's been struggling as of late, and so with that neck injury potentially sticking around, I think that there might be safer options elsewhere.
How about this, Kyle Pitts or Tyler Higbee this week?
I would choose Pitts.
I think I would too. I mean, we've seen 2 of Higbee's last 3 games have been underwhelming, I believe. Yeah. Because they had a bye. Yeah. So, I think you have to trust in Pitts. Didn't seem too bold going into the season, but that's just one example of a lineup decision.
Sure. On to the running backs here. Darrell Henderson dropped in snap percentage from 71% before their bye week to 41% in Week 8. It's important to note he was dealing with an illness. This is more than likely noise rather than news. Say this one 5 times fast. Rookie running back Ronnie Rivers reverted back to the practice squad. I was seeing a lot of people picking up Ronnie Rivers on the trending feature in Sleeper.
I don't even think he has a picture, does he?
well, he's a rookie, so give him a chance. But he was on the practice squad, so
Fair enough.
This is also noise. I believe there's no reason to have Ronnie Rivers on your roster. There's another one for you. The player that I am interested in, again, I'll mention Kyron Williams. Could return from IR this week. This is not the week to start him, however, unless you're absolutely desperate, as Tampa Bay is often among the league's best at defending the run. So monitor that situation, but this is like a, kind of future conversation. And then Cam Akers, who was surprisingly not dealt at the trade deadline. Yeah. Reports indicate that the team is going to attempt to work with his agent to get him back playing for the team. It's kind of a weird situation that they're holding him out for personal reasons, and then when they don't get a deal done, they're like, hey, you want to play? So
I saw like a trade that I thought was officially proposed to another team, and it was like surprising that they didn't take him from the Rams. I don't remember the exact example, so I'm not going to make one up.
Okay.
But quite the offense from the defending Super Bowl champs.
Yeah, they're definitely limping into this one, we'll say. With the Bucs on the other side of this game, nothing really changed for me between Week 8 previews and now. Tom Brady is more than likely your best option if you roster him, and Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Leonard Fournette remain lineup locks. I know you're giggling because I have Joe Burrow. Yes, I know that's so funny to you, but hey, I traded for him.
I agree with that.
I traded for him at season low value. What do you want from me?
No, I agree. I'm just saying that you're an exception to that more than likely statement. But
yes.
I think it is more than likely. I think that's true. You started the season with Stafford and Brady.
Yeah, so that was a hell of a change, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think Stafford's heading into this week as the QB 24. So in two quarterback 12-team leagues, he's your guy. All right.
Oh, I kind of forgot we had to pick this game.
We do have to pick this game, and I am choosing the Buccaneers.
Were they both on bye? Oh, wait, no.
No.
Buccaneers were Thursday.
Yeah. They put up a pretty good fight. Not great, but...
Fine. Brady at home.
All right.
Over a team I'm equally not passionate about, so...
Okay.
There you go.
Moving on to Sunday Night Football. We're here on the home stretch now. Titans, 12.5-point underdogs on the road at the Chiefs. No surprise here. My one note, start Derrick Henry. I'm going to join you.
I hate this team.
I'm going to join
I honestly hate them.
in picking the Chiefs.
I hate them.
But that's it. Start Derrick Henry. He's back to being the king. It's good to see him healthy and continuing his dominance at the position. But moving on to the Chiefs here, Patrick Mahomes, they're coming off of a Week 8 bye, by the way. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Juju Smith-Schuster are all lineup locks. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a flex consideration. Kansas City acquired Kadarius Toney, who has been dealing with a hamstring injury most of the year, via trade last week. And Andy Reid is quoted as saying Toney is healthy now, so monitor his usage in this one. I also heard that Toney went on social media and said, I'm healthy now, and people kind of gave him flack because, the optics of being traded to a playoff contender and then being like, oh yeah, I'm good to play, y'all. It's like, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I saw a lot of memes about it, and it's crazy because the Giants are 6-2, same record as the Chiefs. Is that right? Or maybe one game more.
No, that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say the Chiefs are more legit. But yeah, I think Toney probably.
You take the Chiefs.
Fine.
You take the Chiefs up against the Giants. They're probably going to win every single time.
For sure. But it's interesting to say that he wasn't fleeing like a bottom tier team, at least by what the record is.
No, yeah, definitely. But Toney is an athletic playmaker on the field when healthy. We've seen him put up almost near 200 receiving yard game last season. It'll be interesting to see where he fits in with this offense.
I would have loved to pick him up but you already picked him up. So
hey,
there you go.
That's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Blake Schefter.
That's right. Mecole Hardman scored 3 touchdowns on 6 touches in Week 7. That's got to be one of your favorite stat lines ever.
Never touch a Hardman.
This was a fun DFS play. I'm gonna breeze past that. He was a fun DFS play. Unreliable usage in season-long fantasy. Only a flex consideration in deeper leagues. Really not much else to add there. With Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this is why we call him CEH. He's a touchdown-dependent flex. Interesting to note that Isaiah Pacheco was named the starting running back in Week 7 prior to their bye week.
Yeah.
Monitor his usage this week. Otherwise, most likely a desperation flex play for Pacheco. Yeah, it's still a committee. I really don't know why they decided to name Pacheco as the starter. It seemed like ceremonial, not really anything meaningful. So continue to monitor that one. Moving on to Monday Night Football, we have the Ravens with their long break from Thursday to now the following Monday. Up against the Saints. Gus Edwards with his hamstring injury is considered day-to-day. Playing on Monday night necessitates having a contingency plan in the form of Kenyon Drake or starting a safer option earlier in the week. You don't want to find yourself on Monday night taking a 0 from Edwards if he gets ruled out in this one.
Yeah. That does make it awkward for whoever manages him in your league.
Yeah, with Rashad Bateman and his foot injury that's flared back up again, expected to miss multiple weeks. Baltimore will be on a bye next week. I'm going to ask you, Carson, and I think it's going to make you sad a little bit, but is Bateman droppable in leagues without an IR?
Say it ain't so. I think that if you have a really bad record, yeah. If you don't, I wouldn't drop him.
So, I mean, that's fair. That's fair. Like, the concern, though, is, like, with me all year, in games where he didn't score a touchdown, he's been bad. Like, 5.9 at New England, 4.7 versus Buffalo. Those aren't great matchups, obviously. 8.2 against Cleveland in Week 7, and then a 0 at Tampa Bay on Thursday because he left that game hurt. So,
honestly, going into Week 3, I was skeptical. After having him for his first 2 weeks where he did really good, because I thought that it's going to be hard to keep this up. It's been long touchdown after long touchdown. But that being said, I still feel like being Lamar Jackson's number 1 wide receiver, and Lamar Jackson has been, he started the season extremely efficient passing, and, I think he can go back to that level. So I still want someone, I still think he has value. But... yeah, there's no reason to hold on to him despite yourself if you're needing to fill that slot. I feel like he's not the difference in me playing a unreliable player in my starting lineup, so that's why I feel like I can just hold on to him.
No, I get that. I think it's important, to say that if you need to, Bateman is droppable. Moving on, if you roster Mark Andrews, who's ailing with a shoulder injury, you need to have rookie tight end Isaiah Likely on your roster as well. Likely filled in extremely effectively while Andrews was ruled out early on Thursday Night Football, catching 6 of 7 targets for 77 yards and a touchdown. I don't know how much of that game you watched, but he looked like a wide receiver out there. He's wearing number 80. He's pretty slender. And just not exactly the tight end build that you would expect, but obviously I believe a converted wide receiver from college. And he looked the part. He played great in that game. And if you roster Andrews, this is kind of the only scenario where I'm really considering rostering Likely, because what is your alternative if Mark Andrews gets the nod? You're stuck with Likely maybe getting 3 points on your team. So it's a very specific scenario where you can use him.
Not that often that you have the opportunity to advocate for a tight end handcuff, but I think this legitimately is one.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on to the Saints in this one, Alvin Kamara exploded for 3 total touchdowns and over 40 fantasy points last week. 18 for 62 on the ground and a touchdown, and 9 for 10 for 96 yards and 2 additional touchdowns last week. Awesome there. Moving on, Chris Olave continues to provide solid value as a rookie wide receiver. And here's how we're going to end the show. It's a little bit of a sour note, but Michael Thomas, with his foot injury, now apparently has no timetable for his return, according to head coach Dennis Allen.
Here we go again.
Are you right? Are you holding Thomas, or are you looking to trade him away so he can become someone else's problem moving forward?
If someone's looking to trade for him, I would definitely entertain the idea, but I just don't know how likely that is. I would not drop him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think that's a likely consideration, but yeah, it would be nice if he was someone else's problem if you had him. So yeah, that's what I'll say. I could have never told you the name of the Saints head coaches, by the way, so I saw that name and I was like, what? But then I saw HC, so
yeah,
fun times.
Yeah, so that concludes the show.
You're picking the Ravens and I'm picking the Saints. That's something that's happening right here. I don't even know how many times we've differed. Not too many, but this is one right here.
Yeah. So that is how it's going to go for Monday night on that one. Thank you all so much for watching and or listening, and we will see you again next week.
Peace out, everybody.